Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks Adam for the news. That was a lot of useful stuff in there. There's a lot more stuff in the TFS and Visual Studio that you didn't mention, but hopefully we'll get through some of that today. By the way, what do you think of the logo? Have you guys seen the new logo? Took a while to figure out what was different. Can anyone see the slight little subtle hint towards Microsoft in there? Subtle little. Right. Yeah, just a little Steve Jobs silhouette in the corner of the thing. No. All right. Anyway, I think it's great. I love it.
It had to be flat because we were getting too much space.
Yep.
The fact that we were looking old.
Yeah, Metro all the way until the next thing.
These are going 3D, the web is going
3D. That's right. So the old one's up there. Adam, if you're watching the video, you'll see Adam was wearing a shirt with the old logo. I've got a shirt with a new logo. There you go. All right, that'll change soon, I'm sure. Right, so today we're going to talk about Team Foundation Server extensibility. So there's a couple of, if you're going to tweet during this session, there's a couple of Twitter things you can use there. Hashtag is NetUG as always. And SSW TV, and that's my Twitter handle there as well, if you want to get in contact about any of this stuff. So today, in general, we're going to go through 5 things. So there's a lot of extensibility points in TFS, but these are the 5 we're going to look at. We're going to look at process template customization, client object model, server object model, and the last 2 are really cool. They're the new ones, the new REST APIs that Microsoft has released, and service hooks, which kind of comes bundled in with the REST APIs. So the impetus for this session and the reason I'm doing it really was because, and here's a little quick plug, I spent a bit of time co-authoring a book, and we're going to give that one out today as well actually, so if you have any questions, shout out. I'll just decide at the end who's giving me a good question and we'll give that away. The value of this is, I think, is about 300 or so hours of my time that I'll never get back. That's how much it costs. But when I was doing that, the final chapter in the book, I had a bit of exposure to TFS extensibility over the last few years, extending it and plugging in and stuff like that. But as I started delving into that chapter, I realized just the depth of stuff that you can do with TFS. So there's this misconception around the place that whatever TFS gives you out of the box is the way that it works. You know, if your process doesn't quite fit into that template that you're using, then stiff. That's where you're stuck. Or if you're using some third-party tool that doesn't have integration into TFS, then oh, too bad. And nothing could be further from the truth. They open up TFS in a huge way. There's a huge number of extensibility points, and we'll see that here. So a little bit about me just before I go on. I co-authored this book. I'm an MVP in Visual Studio ALM, MSTS, MCSD, MBA, another one I'm working on, an OMG, WTF, BBQ. Anyone? Oh, I got some smiles this time. Nobody in Canberra knew what that was at all.
What the freaking barbecue?
Yeah. Oh my God, what the freaking barbecue. That's an excellent way of putting it. I just left a word out last time. I also am a solution architect for SSW, been here for a few years now, and I run the Queensland office out of Brisbane, so we've got quite a few guys up there now. So the stuff I love doing day to day, obviously TFS, a lot of love for TFS, Scrum and that process like everybody at SSW, and then I'm a web developer mainly, so ASP.NET MVC, HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, TypeScript, jQuery, all of that good stuff, Angular. I could keep going. So that's what I love doing. I love writing for the web, and I love TFS and process. So let's talk a little bit about extensibility. The question really is, what do I mean about extensibility? And like I said, TFS has really opened up the world for developers to talk to TFS and to get information from TFS. Extensibility really is a quality of design that takes all possible future advances into consideration and attempts to accommodate them. So that's a pretty straightforward Wiktionary definition. I'm not presenting a formal article, so I can use Wikipedia all I want. But basically it means that, yes, here's the product, TFS, but we know you might want to do some other stuff with it, so here's how you here's how we've opened it up so you can do some other stuff with it. So that's really what I'm talking about today. How can you do other stuff with it? So there's a few ways. I've separated these into 5 just to make it a bit easier. You can customize TFS, and that means just making changes within the boundaries of what TFS offers. And most of the time that is with work items. You know, add fields to work items, things like that. Change your process template. So that doesn't really require any code, much configuration, things like that. It's stuff that's built in. It does require a little bit of work to get it working, but you know, it's something which you're not writing your own application out the side. Notification, when something happens in TFS, then your application, your code can be notified and you can do something to a third-party application or whatever it is. Interception goes a little bit further, and it says not only am I notified when something happens, but I have the ability to affect the outcome. So the good example of that you might all be familiar with is check-in policies. So when you check in, when you go to check in a bit of code, if you haven't assigned it to a work item and you have that check-in policy turned on, it won't let you check in, so it cancels that event. So they actually make some of this stuff available to you in TFS out of the, with the APIs that they offer. And obviously reading and writing, getting information out of TFS and writing information to TFS. So that's kind of our separation. And as we go through these 5 extensibility tools a bit later, I'm going to tell you which ones of these they cover. So there's a few different ways to do it. All right. So let's start. We'll start at the one that most people know about, which is process template customization. And obviously that's dealing with our customization. Has anybody done this before, process template customization? Nobody? Excellent. This will be a good little intro then. So the idea behind this is that you change the process template. So that's your work items, it's your the different states that those work items can have, how that appears, what fields are in there, all of that kind of stuff to match your process rather than the other way around. So if you're doing Scrum but or Scrum kind of or anything like that, which of course you shouldn't be, but if you are, then you can modify the templates to suit what your process does. If, for example, and this is one of the really common ones, if your bugs go through a triage stage, and that's really, really important to your company, rather than just saying, oh, well, you know, when it's new, we'll make it, that's the triage state, and then somebody will put a comment in there, and then it can go to in progress. You can add a triage state and set rules around it and things like that. So you can work this process out so that it follows what you guys do rather than the other way around. Just a little side note here. I've had a few questions about this before about team projects. So when you modify a process template, you can apply that change to an existing team project, or you can upload it to the TFS server as, when I start a new project, give me this option as one of the team projects. This applies to a single team project though. So your decisions around how many team projects you should create, whether you should have one team project with everything in it or, you know, a whole lot of different team projects. That's a really important decision because it's hard to change later on. So just make sure you look that up. There's some stuff in the book about that, and there's also some stuff on the ALM Ranges website. So if you have a look at that, it provides some guidance about how to go about that. Anyway, a little side note, sorry. So the popular changes, the things that most people change are, or does anybody have any suggestions? You guys have said that you haven't done a lot of this, but have you, if you were to change something about your process template, any ideas about what you'd like to change the most? Anybody? Questions? No?
Add new fields.
Adding new fields? Yep. So there you go, predictable. That's the most common thing that people do.
Yeah, handy to have maybe 2 developers on a work item rather than 1.
Ah, assigning 2 developers to a work item instead of 1. Yeah, that would be a pretty cool one. So currently that, and I'll go off on a little tangent here. Currently that assign to field is a single drop down of all the users. If you wanted to assign it to a couple of people, then yeah, you could have a multi drop down checkbox, which actually our office in China, those guys have done a customization for process templates, which will allow you to choose more than one thing from a drop down. So you could apply that. So it's really extensible. They've done basically exactly what you were mentioning. So you know, multi drop downs and things like that. The other thing we see a lot is the states. So like I was saying, a triage state for bugs, if you want to change that state and the rules between them. rules that occur not just with fields, so the things that you can put in the field, but you can use rules to do things like set the current hours to 5 less than the original effort or something when it moves to an active state. Or you can do a ton of stuff here. You can do a lot of different things. The really useful ones are things like who can change to active or who can mark a bug as completed. So that's a really common one as well. So you can lock that down to individual security groups to say only people in the administrators group can mark a bug as done. The other thing you can do is when you create a new team project, you can change what happens there, what gets set up. So when you do an initial team project now, you get a certain set of permissions, a certain set of user groups, security groups, certain teams. So a team for the for each area is the kind of the default now. But you can change all of that stuff. You can put queries and reports in. So reporting services report, you can add them. So when you create a new project, it'll create these new reports for you. And even SharePoint templates. So the pages that get created when you integrate with SharePoint. So you can have new pages, you could have a document store for your site, all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't have had otherwise. There's a lot of stuff you can do. So, there's your fields, all of that stuff, states and transitions between them, so a new state and so on. The layout, if you wanted to move that section of the UI, you can actually do that by modifying your process template. The controls themselves, so you could change this rich text to control to a different control, and even provide assemblies and things to TFS to use for Windows controls. There's categories, so what stuff appears in your backlog items. You might remember there was a change a little while ago where it used to be product backlog items. This is in the sprint template, just in your backlog, and now it's product backlog items and bugs. So they did that by just adding bugs to the category. So you could add your own types as well. Link types, so different links between work items. So whether something references something or other else, or whether something is maybe more information about a work item or a prerequisite or something like that. Lists, so the things you can choose in the drop-downs. Workflows and global fields as well. So an area path is a global field. It applies to all of the different work items. You could add a new global field, something else like company department that applies to all of the work items across the board as well. So huge numbers of stuff, huge numbers of things you can do. There's also a plugin for Visual Studio for editing these work items. So ultimately these things are really just a gigantic, I'm getting there, a gigantic list of XML files, a gigantic bunch of XML files that will define all of these things, the work item types. But if you download the Team Foundation Power Tools, you get this beautiful process editor. And you can edit work item types, you can edit entire process templates. So I'll just open one I've downloaded and just show you what it looks like. So this is the Visual Studio Scrum 2013. And it'll show us, you can see all the stuff here, all the beautiful things. Oops. Work item tracking, so the categories, the default work items, all that kind of stuff. Areas and iterations that exist. Even lab templates and build templates that happen by default. All this kind of stuff you can change. The other great thing is the tasks, or sorry, the different work item types. You can change all the fields that are in them. You can change the UI. So this is a little bit hard to work with, this tree grid, but you can preview the form. So what that means, or how that translates, it translates to this. But as well as that, and here's a really cool one, is do workflow. So you can see when a new one is created, it goes to to-do, there's a transition to go to in progress, you can go to done, removed, and there's rules around these things as well. So a set of reasons that it's moved from in progress to done that you can change. You can add things like when it makes this transition, it adds a remaining time, or it sets the remaining time to 0, because if it's done, there's nothing left. So you can set all these rules and make things really powerful. So this is a really cool tool. And then when you're done with this, you can upload it to the server and it will apply from that point on. So I won't go into this too much. There's a lot. This could be its own 2-hour talk by itself. But rather than subject you to that, I'm just going to continue on with the much cooler stuff. So process template customization. You can change all this stuff. You can change the processes and rules, the resources available when you start new projects. Now it's not, this is what I'm going to do for each of these. I'm going to give you the positives and the negatives of using this stuff. So the best things about this, it's really powerful. You can do a lot of stuff. We've had clients who have come to us and said, we want to make sure that somebody has signed off a product backlog item, like a person in a particular group has signed off a product backlog item before it can be moved to done. So we put in a new field for that sign off, which just takes the value from the current user, and also you can't go to the next position until that field is set, and only certain people in certain groups can move it to done. And that has the effect of making sure that the last step is done by somebody in a particular security group. So you can do some really cool stuff just by combining these rules and these fields. It's easier than you think when you start getting going as well. And again, I'll point to the book. There's a whole chapter on this, chapter 13, about process templates and how to change them and what you can do. But most importantly, it lets you fit the template into your process rather than trying to force your team's process back into the template. And that's really important for productivity. The downsides are not available for VS Online at the moment, so you can't change the templates on Visual Studio Online. The other thing is, if you change your process template too much, future upgrades of TFS might cause problems. So you might remember in recent versions of TFS, they introduced the features or portfolio backlog management. So you can have features which are essentially epics, and they consist of a chunk of product backlog items. That feature, that extra hierarchy, extra level in the hierarchy, if you changed your process template, it might not have been able to apply that to your process template because it doesn't really know what it looks like anymore. So if you stick with the out-of-the-box ones, all of your upgrades are going to be smooth. They're just going to move to the new stuff and give you these new features straight out of the box. But if you make too many changes, then that upgrade path is a little bit hazy. So just keep that in mind. If you can get away with the existing process templates, it's probably better to do that. Great. So any questions, just before we move on, any questions about process template editing? Does anybody think they're going to have a look at it a little bit? Are there things that you would change with your process template that you think maybe it's worth having a look at? Only a couple.
I like the idea, but I'm using VS Online.
Yep. So it's a great idea, but if you're using VS Online, David just mentioned, then it's off the cards for the moment. If it came to VS Online, would it be something you'd look at? Yep, definitely. Yeah, so it's really useful, but it has its place, and you've got to be a little bit careful with it. Like all of these things, actually. That's why it's cool, because you can do damage. Right, so I'll move into the client object model. So this has been around for a while, and it basically lets you read and write to and from TFS. So this one's really cool because it's basically a set of assemblies that you get, and they're really available. They're easily, if you have Visual Studio on your machine, you probably have them. And they expose basically everything inside TFS to you. So you can work with TFS. It's the most common way that any third-party application will talk to TFS. If you have something on your machine like Team Companion or what else is there? Sidekicks, Team Foundation Sidekicks, this is the way it's going to be talking to TFS. It's actually even used by Team Explorer and all the .NET Client applications. So in other words, if you're using an application anywhere that talks directly to TFS, they're probably using these assemblies, or they have been in the past. That means that if you're writing an application that talks to TFS, you're doing exactly the same as the team that wrote Team Explorer. And so you have everything that they have. So that's really cool. It gives you an idea of exactly the scope of this thing. This URL is a link to the SDK, which is the client object model, the server object model, which we'll talk about a bit later. There's also a build object model. There's also details about how to talk to it in a lot of different ways. So that's a great starting point for going ahead and talking to TFS, extending TFS. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff in here. So there are a lot of assemblies. Not all of them are useful. These ones I found are probably the most useful. There's the client, which is basically your one that everything else needs. it needs to know how to talk to TFS. The version control client, which is all your Team Foundation version control stuff, and your work item tracking client. So these assemblies contain a lot of stuff that you can use. There's also the Git client, as you would imagine as well. And these expose a lot of stuff. Inside these, there's a lot of objects as well. So here are some of them, some of the ones you'll use, but generally the way these work is you instantiate one of these guys. So I create a new TFS team project collection, and they have different purposes. I give it the URI of TFS, and I give it some credentials, and then I use that to get one of these. And now I've got this version control server object, and I can do tons and tons of stuff with it. This other one down the bottom, this team project picker. So this is one of the few UI elements that they expose to you, and in fact it's the only one I've been able to find really. There are one or two others floating around of very limited use, and they're generally not exposed and not published. So do you guys recognize this dialog here? Whenever you connect to TFS, this is how you do it. So you can instantiate one of these team project pickers from the assemblies that they give you and get this guy up and running, get the details back for whatever projects and stuff they pick. So you don't have to worry about all that communication back and forth from TFS. So really, really useful as like a first step for your application. Hey, you want to connect to TFS? Here's the dialog. And if that changes, then your UI will change as well because you're using their assemblies. Anyway, useful one to be useful. Useful one to see. So I want to have a look at this, but first I'm going to introduce, this is Bruce. Bruce is one of our clients. He came to me with this great idea. So he'd seen, when he picked up his iPad every day, he noticed that all of the updates for his apps said that they had performance updates. Yeah, TJ?
Sorry, why does he have colorful keyboard?
Is there a purpose for that?
Not really. I didn't think I'd be pulled up on the image, but
Yeah, that's all I noticed.
yeah. Oh, really? All right. Note to self: crop that out.
I noticed his hairy chest.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you?
Sorry, it's
Adam,
just it's the first time I've seen something like this. That's why.
It's got new highlights.
Sorry, Damian.
Yeah. So TJ and Dan noticed the keyboard. Adam Kogan noticed the hairy chest and the unbuttoned. You didn't. Nobody noticed the blank stare or anything like that. Maybe I should pick it. I'll pick a new picture next time. Anyway, he has highlighters and he doodles. That's why the keyboard. I don't know. Anyway, video editing keyboard. Oh right, excellent. There you go. Oh, the video guy knows what it is. It's a video editing keyboard. Anyway, so when he opens his iPad and goes to the App Store, he notices all of the apps, when they have updates, they say bug fixes and performance improvements. He goes, bug fixes, I don't want to say there's bug fixes. I don't know why everybody says there's bug fixes. That just seems ridiculous to me. Anyway, but performance improvements, hey, that's an awesome idea. And he knows that we get our, his application, he gets the release notes for each version from your check-in comments. So he makes sure that developers are putting in nice, sensible English check-in comments. So he said, hey, can you just go back to all your check-ins? Just change all your check-ins and put performance improvements in there. Sensible idea, right? That makes sense?
Have a look, stability improvement, what's that?
Stability improvements. It's performance improvements. He's just decided he wants performance improvements for all of his. All right? So we're going to have a look at the client object model and how we might go about doing that. So let's kill the process editing. And so I did a little trial application, and rather than show you all the lines and explain them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through it. So let's this VM full size. So here's our client object model demo. I'm going to set that as a startup project, and we're going to start it. And we'll step through, and I'll show you how easy it is to talk to TFS and make changes like this. So the first thing we do, and this came straight from the previous slide, you remember, we create one of these TFS team project collection objects. We connect it to a Team Foundation server instance. So I've got one running locally. We get the client, we just do a default client credentials, which you'll pass in whichever user you're using at the moment, which is very easy. From there, we create a version control server. We go and get one of these version control servers, and now we've got this VCS object we can do all this stuff with. So I want to get the latest change set ID using a method called getLatestChangeSetID. Couldn't really be easier. Now that I have that ID, I want to get this latest change set, and I'm just going to dump some information out to the screen about what that is. So I'm going to put down the ID, I'm going to say who committed it and what their comment was. So let's have a look. There we go. So the last committer was me, as you'd expect, and I improved the error handling of the work item voter demo. But that's good, but it doesn't have performance improvements in it, and that's what he wants. You know, how is he going to send this out as a feature if I haven't said that there's a performance improvement? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the change sets comment, add a new line, and performance improvement. And then I'm going to call update. Now just to make sure that nothing weird happens here, I'm just going to go and get that change set again from TFS, and I'm going to dump out that same information. And now, change set 13, I'm the committer. The comment is improved error handling of work item voter and performance improvement. So pretty cool, right? So all we need to do now is just like loop through the rest of the work items in the past and change them all. So they've all got performance improvements now and everybody's happy. So that, in a handful of lines of code, has managed to make that change. So I'm just going to undo that. There we go. So really, really easy. We've got a really small number of lines of code, and we're able to make that change. Does anybody have any comments about this change that's just been made in code? Anything you noticed that might be a little bit unusual? So the thing that somebody pointed out to me is you're changing the comment on a change set that's already been checked in. Is that something you really want to do? Maybe not. But in this case, because we've got this client object model, we can do stuff like this.
Possibly might want to do it if you've actually run some performance tests, can equate it back to the change in, and can quantify exactly how the performance changed up or down.
Yep.
Because then you're starting to make your development team far more aware of the performance ramifications, and they're not thinking feature, 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 but they're thinking, oh, I've actually done some damage now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, coming back to these change sets and adding stuff to it, it's also really useful if you combine it, if you're combining it with the process template modification. So we've had occasions where a customer's come to us and said, look, we just want an indication here of who raised a particular work item. So we have all these bugs, for example. We want to know who originally raised this bug. Was it a client? Was it the developers? Was it a tester? You know, just so we have some tracking of it. So what we can do is we can go and change the process template to add a new field that's reportable by dimension, so we can separate them and say a percentage of them for each. So we add that field and then we apply that to the process template. Now all the previous work items that have been done and marked off as finished, they're not going to have a value in there because we added that field afterwards. But what we can do is we can go back using the client object model, maybe look up the details in the comments, or maybe look at the change sets that, you know, who did it and work out where it is. Maybe even look up a third-party system to see if it's in your bug reporting system that your clients have used. And if there's a match, set the value to that work item that's associated with that check-in. So you can start tying these different applications together using a client object model to add detail to your check-in comments in this case, but also to your work items and things like that. So it really opens up this stuff that otherwise you would have had to click through manually and go through each one and make those changes. No. A SQL Server, oh gosh. So TJ wants to go straight to SQL Server. I would be remiss if I said that is not supported. If I failed to mention that is not a supported way of modifying TFS. Yeah. Also, it's really scary because I'm a developer. I don't want to touch the database. Give me the code. Anyway.
That's when it gets exciting.
It gets exciting when you're editing a database straight off. So TJ, do you do a lot of skydiving and things like that? The dangerous sports? Yeah. So there you go. Anyway, really simple example. Went back to our client. Client really happy. You know, now he can put his release notes out and fantastic. Everybody can see how much performance improvement we're doing. So one thing I mentioned that this exposes a lot of stuff. It exposes nearly everything. So that version control client that we access there, that assembly contains about 360 classes. And in one of those classes, the one that we use, the version control server, there's about 200 methods. So that may not say fantastic things for, you know, single responsibility principle, but it gives you an idea of the scope of what is made available to you. So we've got 200 methods on one of 360 classes in one of a few dozen assemblies that they make available. So you know, pretty much everything is made available to you. And remember, everything Team Explorer does uses these libraries. So if Team Explorer can do it, you can do it in code. Now, obviously that makes it incredibly powerful. It makes it fast as well, because you're not going to get faster than the products that Microsoft puts out. Okay, so Team Explorer is probably going to be as fast as you're going to be able to talk to TFS. And if you're using the same assemblies and the same type of code, then your stuff's going to be as fast as it can get. It's really easy to work with. So you saw just how easy it was to grab an object and then write some data to it and do an update. And there's a huge amount of documentation. So there's MSDN articles on every single one of these classes, every method they expose to you, all that kind of stuff. It's obviously potentially dangerous. If I had a loop that went through every single work item and just dumped, like killed all the comments, or sorry, every check-in and killed all the comments, it's going to be a bit hard to get that back. You can do it, look at the history and pull that back out, but you know, it's dangerous. And that's what makes it exciting. Hey TJ. Yep. There are some small version inconsistencies too. So you can use the TFS 2013 assemblies to talk to TFS 2010, for example, but some things might behave a different way, and some methods might not work, and things like that. And even though there's a lot of documentation, it's not always that easy to find working examples. So yeah, there's a great bit of documentation on this method in this class, but it doesn't really tell you where that class comes from or when you should use it and things like that. So yeah, pros and cons with all this documentation. It's good for the how, but not so much for the why or you know, structuring a whole application around it.
You have a pretty good blog though on TFS. So.
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources I've got at the end, blogging with TFS and so on, and of course chapter 27. So the comment was about, TJ's comment was about the blog that I have, and the blog, there's also a lot of TFS rules at SSW as well, but I'm starting to blog these extensibility points as well as I discover them and as I see how cool they are, some really good examples of what they are. So yeah, check out my blog. There'll be a link at the end. Thanks. Nice little... Was that the question, like wanting the book? So it's a good way of doing it. All right, so any other questions about the client object model just before we move on to the next one? All right, yeah, William.
So we can see the client object model is only available for like .NET platform. So what if I want to call TFS from like Linux or
a web page?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question about accessing TFS and writing code that talks to TFS from a different platform.
Yeah.
So from, if you're writing in Java for Linux or something like that.
Yes, right.
So I'll say there are assemblies available for Java and things like that as well. They're not the same ones because these are DLLs that are part of your TFS instance. But there are other ways to talk to TFS from anywhere, really. And that's such a good question. I'm going to ask you to wait for about half an hour because I'll get to it. Yeah, so just cool your jets. We'll get there. All right.
Thanks.
But I'll show you. It'll be the coolest part, trust me. All right, so server object model. So server object model, as you'd expect, goes from the server. So we were from a client, another bit of technology talking to TFS. Now we're going from within TFS. So there's two things you can do here. You can be notified when something happens, and you can have an ability to change what happens as a result. So there's two different ways of doing it. It's the server-side interaction, like I said, and it uses a plugin model. And it's actually a really, really easy model to work with. Basically, you implement an interface. That's an interface for particular types of things. And then you drop that DLL that you create in a folder, and you're done. TFS will pick it up. It'll go, oh, this is a subscriber of this particular thing. I'm just going to let that code run when that happens. Really, really easy. A lot of out-of-the-box features as well. So once again, Microsoft is using this stuff themselves. So if you have a look in that folder, in your TFS instance, you'll see Microsoft.teamfoundation.lab execution and .core and .team room and all this sort of stuff. It uses exactly the same model to do most of this stuff. So once again, if you're writing a plugin using this stuff, then you're doing it exactly the same way as Microsoft is doing it. So you don't have to worry about, am I getting everything that Microsoft is getting? They're really exposing everything. So we've seen from the client side, you get everything that their applications do. Now from the server side, you get everything that TFS can do as well. Once again, that's your starting point for all of this stuff, and there's a lot of documentation around this as well. So once again, there's a huge number of things that you can do. It's a massive pit of assemblies all over the place. The use and the interfaces you can use. There's a huge number of them as well. Here are the useful ones: iSubscriber, Team Foundation Request Filter, and Team Foundation Job Extension. So iSubscriber will notify you of certain events, like somebody checked in some code, or somebody pushed to a Git repository, or a build finished, or any of those things. Somebody posted to a team room, all of that kind of stuff. Team Foundation Request Filter goes one step further. Now you may know that everything that talks to TFS over HTTP, HTTPS. So it's basically just web or internet HTTP calls to TFS to send that information and get a response. The Team Foundation Request Filter lets you intercept every single one of those requests. So if you wanted to completely remove the work item management from Team Foundation server and throw it in something obviously inferior like Jira, apologies to people using Jira, then you could intercept every single one of those requests and send it over to Jira and do that work there instead and then come back. If you wanted to. Shouldn't, but you can do that. So every single request made to TFS you can intercept, which gives you an infinite amount of power, essentially. The final one is the job extension. So there are jobs that run as part of TFS, creating warehouse stuff and cleaning things up and ditching connections that aren't there anymore and all that kind of stuff. You can write your own jobs. So maybe there's a job to clean up that performance impact or the performance improvements every couple of months or something like that. Yeah, TJ.
I found the workspace management a bit clunky in TFS. So is it possible to write a plugin that actually does workspace management the way you want it? Because, I mean, you could not do it from the UI. You have to use PowerShell, and, you know, workspace management is, in my opinion, is one of the weak links in TFS,
yep.
Especially if you are working with different TFS repositories, servers, and whatnot.
Yeah. So workspace management. The answer to could you write a plugin to change this stuff? The answer is yes, but that's kind of a fundamental part of TFS. I think it'd be quite dangerous to try and change the way that works. The other side of the coin is that there's basically 3 different ways you can do workspaces now anyway. And so you'd have to account for those. So there's Git, you can use that. It's not really a workspace, it's just a local repository. There's local workspaces. So the server doesn't even really know about that. You just have a local copy of all the files, and locally there's a TFS hidden folder, a .tfs hidden folder, and it contains all the information. It works out changes, and then it just tells the server, hey, this stuff's getting checked in. But the one you're probably talking about is your server workspaces, where the server is aware that there's a workspace that exists on this person's computer under this login with this version of code and so on. That one, I'm not 100%, no, there is a place for it, so I won't say that it might not be around longer. There is a place for it. So setting up those workspaces, yes, there'd be calls going to TFS to set those up. So yes, you could intercept them if you want, and you could make changes to it. You could do that from another third-party application. And Team Foundation Sidekicks, for example, is something that does that through the client object model, though. So it'll work with that as well. So if there are ways that you want to change setting them up and creating them automatically and things like that, then yeah, definitely you could You could probably do that from the client object model actually, rather than the server object model. And it'd probably be easier because this runs basically as an event model. Something happens and you get the opportunity to do stuff, as opposed to your code is setting up a new workspace or querying the workspaces and things.
The problem usually happens when you change the TFS servers.
When you change to what, sorry?
The TFS servers, so it was called TFS1, right? You just go into check-in. Now the new server has a different name.
Yeah.
So then your workspaces kind of blow up in your face.
That's, look, that problem's going to be there regardless of what you try and do, to be honest. The first couple of times I used Git in TFS, I totally overwrote the repository with an empty folder. And I went, what's the latest version? It goes, oh, the latest version is nothing. I went, that's not, no, it's not. So yeah, that was, yeah, well, the good thing about Git is I can just point the head back at the previous version and say, no, that's the latest one. Forget about that thing I did. It doesn't exist. But yeah, all of that kind of stuff, changing a server, there's actually a lot of MSDN documentation on what to do if you need to change the name of a TFS server, if that's what you're talking about. That's
because you're changing boxes, basically.
Yeah, it's hard. All of those big changes like that are just hard. You got to be careful. Back the whole thing up, do a mirror, try it, watch it fail, and catch flames. Kill that one, do it again. Yeah. It's a hard thing to do. So all of that admin stuff, I don't think these are going to help you with that, to be honest. That's just going to suck. Having said that, if you know that all of the workspaces need to change names, you could probably kill the workspace and then recreate them again using client object model, I guess.
Yeah, we'll talk. I had some fun with that.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, right, yes.
quite interesting journey.
Yep. It's
Playing with workspaces.
Yep. In general, you'll find in this talk the answer to can I do this with TFS is yes, and you probably shouldn't. That's usually the answer. Sometimes you should, and those ones are the cool ones. So yeah, these are the interfaces that they expose to. There's also some other ones that you should not touch, like iSecurity namespace extension, iIdentity provider. If you want to if you want to create your own identity provider for TFS, so it gets its authentication from a completely different location, yeah, implement that one. But you know, have fun with that. That's going to be really painful. Yeah, there are some tricky things with some of these as well. So the good ones are your iSubscriber, your request filter, and your job extension. So our client's back. Bruce has come back to me and he's gone, that's fantastic, that's really good, but you know, occasionally your developers forget and they haven't been putting in that performance improvement, and I want it every time. So can you just go back and update them all again? You know, because there's a few that are missing. I just want you to do that. So he said, Bruce, I can do you one better. I can stop anybody from checking in unless they write performance improvement in their check-in comment. So let's have a look at that. We'll kill this guy. This one will still run. We can run that every now and then, but now we've got a better option. We've got this server object model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class called performance comment check-in subscriber. And just as I mentioned, it implements the iSubscriber one. So that means that TFS is going to let us know when events occur. There's a few methods that we implement here. One is subscribed types. And so there's a huge number of these types that you can subscribe to, but we're basically saying we only want to be subscribed to check-in notifications. So when somebody goes to check in, right? We give it a name just so we can see what these things are later on. And we give it a priority. So if you have something that's really, really important, then you know it needs to have a higher priority, and it'll run first. TFS will make sure that it actually finishes, things like that. In general, your own plugins, it's probably better to leave them as low, because there's, believe it or not, there's some stuff that TFS implements this way that is extremely important that you don't want to get in the way of. That said, I've never had a problem with these things not running. The documentation basically says that if you implement one of these, maybe it won't run. Like there are some occasions, sometimes where it won't run. But I haven't had that. I haven't encountered that yet. if your server's under enough load that it's not going to run your plugin, then you've probably got bigger problems. So I wouldn't worry. So then we have our main one, our process event method. So there's two things. You know how I said that we could be notified and we have an interception as well? So there's two of these notification types that occur, and that's one of the arguments that gets passed. One is the decision point, which is a what would you like me to do now? Here's the information. Do you want me to continue? Do you want me to cancel? And the other one is a notification, which is just I did this thing. Yep, have the information. That's fine. So we want to stop people from checking in. So our thing is a decision point. Just to be safe, I'm going to check that the notification we get is a check-in notification. It should be, but I'm a bit overcautious. And then I'm going to grab these things. I'm going to make sure that our notification, the comment property of that, and that's what you get with your check-in notification with that type. Our comment contains performance improvement. I don't care about the case, but if it has to contain performance improvement. If it doesn't, I'm going to set a status message, which is one of the arguments that gets passed back, and I'm going to say action denied. So you can't check in without that. The final little thing, and if you're going to write one of these, here's a little gotcha. Don't throw exceptions in your plugin. If you throw an exception in your plugin, TFS will go, this thing throws exceptions. I'm going to disable it. And to re-enable it, it's an assembly in a folder. So to re-enable it, you take it out of the folder, you put it back in, and it might run again. Maybe. Because TFS knows what it is, and it knows it throws exceptions. Maybe it's going to decide that you shouldn't run anymore. So ignore everything you've ever been told about software development and swallow the exception. All right? Catch an exception and don't do anything with it. You can log it though, which is really useful to see what stuff is there. Finally, if it gets through all of this sort of stuff, then we're going to say, yep, the action is permitted. It'll continue. Right, so to actually get this thing working, I just need to compile it. So let's build it. And hopefully it compiles. There we go. Succeeded. We're going to go to the location where it built this thing. And just to prove that I'm not cheating, it's 940 on this Windows Azure machine. And we've got our performance comment check-in subscriber, which is at 940. Everybody satisfied? There's no smoke and mirrors? Great. You all trust me anyway, don't you?
You didn't play with file attributes.
I didn't play with it. Do you want me to compile it again? I can compile it again?
Yeah,
I'm kidding. All right. So we've got our plugins. So this is our web services bin plugins folder. And we're going to throw in this comments check-in subscriber. So let's just drop that guy in. Copy him there. Great. We've got this assembly in there. So I don't need to restart TFS or anything like that. But what I do need to do is just make some nothing change. I'm going to delete that space. I don't like extra spaces. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go to Team Explorer and say, right, I'm going to, oh, it looks like I've made some other changes as well. Probably performance improvements. So I'm going to say just increased responsiveness, which is all spelt wrong. Increased responsiveness, great, let's check it in. I'm going to check in these three items. It's going to go ahead, talk to TFS and say, hey, we want to make these changes. It's taking a little while because TFS has noticed we've got a new subscriber. So it's picked that up and it's going, oh, okay, I need to give it these events and all that sort of stuff. That's only the first time you do this. There we go, checking in. And we get this error. Sorry, you can't check in without the words performance improvement. Yeah. So I think this is really cool. Like when I delved into this stuff and discovered it, now this is a really basic example. It made our client happy. Client is over the moon now. Every single check-in has performance improvement. So many performance improvements for his application. But what you can do with this is do things like, you know, don't let somebody check in unless in your third-party system they've also marked that one off as done, or unless they've sent an email to the client that's listed in the field over here and stuff like that. You can do crazy amounts of stuff with this to integrate with all these different third-party systems. It's really, really powerful. So there we go. We'll just to prove that that's working as well, I'm going to say performance improvement. Oh, that'll still work. So I'm going to check that in. You can see it's a bit faster this time because it knows about that subscriber now. So there we go, checked in. So that's really cool. Can anybody see themselves using this? Yeah, a couple of nods. Yeah, probably about half the room gave a bit of a nod then. So these are great. These are fantastic, and it gives you a huge amount of power, really. So yeah, we did that. Client happy. So much improvement. So many performance improvements. So this is obviously the most powerful one, because you're right in the middle of the TFS server. Once again, really, there's a lot of stuff. This iSubscriber, there's 40 plus different events you can capture, and most of them are listed in the book. I keep talking about the book. Little shameless plugs. There's more than 40 events you can capture. Some of them give you the ability to be notified when it happens. Some give you the ability to be notified and make a decision. Most give you both, but not all of them. So some of them it'll just tell you that this stuff happens. This request filter I mentioned gives you access to every request made to TFS. And this one lets you write your own periodically run jobs and things as well. So you can do various things. Once again, really, really powerful. And this truly allows you to change the behavior of TFS. Like I said, if you wanted to move your work items out into a third-party system, then go for it. Intercept every one of those requests and pass it on to somewhere else. And it allows you to add new stuff as well. If I decided TFS was now going to be my location for managing my emails, I could do that. I just need to make changes to various things to talk to TFS and send these requests through and use my server-side stuff to subscribe. Cons, this is potentially really dangerous. Again, makes it really exciting. It's not available for Visual Studio Online, and that makes sense because there's not really a server that you can dump these things into that's exposed to you. There's a few tricky hurdles when you're coding, like the exception thing, and if it just falls over, it's hard to tell what has happened. Particularly because it's running on the server in response to a TFS event. You know, what went wrong? There's no dialogue that pops up. There's nothing like that. So it's a little bit difficult to debug sometimes. And once again, it's a little bit hard to find working examples. Documentation's there, but the examples about what these iSubscriber events are and things like that, a little bit hard to come by. So once again, in the book, last chapter. So any questions about server object model just before we move on? So we're getting to the cool stuff now. So as an intro to this cool stuff, server object model, client object model, great. They're DLLs. You drop them in your project. You start writing code. That's fantastic. But I'm a web developer, as you might have remembered from my first slide. And so I do two things in general. I'll go out and I'll do web development, .NET stuff, and I'll go to a different client and I'll do Team Foundation Server and like Scrum and process and stuff like that. And those two things are traditionally kind of very different worlds, right? So when Web API came in, who uses Web API? Yeah, yep, probably about half, a little bit more than half of the room. So when that came in, that was fantastic as a web developer. It didn't matter where you were. It's just a request, an HTTP request to a URL, using what the internet's used for ages, using different verbs, pass information, get information back. It lets me, and as somebody who's not a huge fan of WCF, it lets me forget about that stuff and just make these service calls. But the biggest thing is you can access this from anywhere. If I had a straight HTML page that was deployed on a Linux server in Kazakhstan, I can still talk to my web API over here. There's no problem at all with that. It means you can write mobile apps, you can write tablet apps, you can make these calls, you can do anything from anywhere essentially, provided there's an internet connection. So that's what REST is really, this HTTP requests, using the verbs, predictable URLs, and the verbs mean certain things and stuff like that. So for example, Twitter. Twitter has an awesome API. Has anybody used the Twitter API? Yeah, a couple. If I want to do a new status update, I will do a post to this URL and pass information in a JSON format. So just pass a string to this URL after some authentication. If I want to get somebody's timeline, then I just hit this URL with a get, and it'll give me that information back. So I can do that from anywhere. So as a web developer and a TFS guy, I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if you could do the same thing and hit TFS from anywhere just using REST? So thankfully, very recently, Microsoft, this is at TechEd North America this year, Microsoft announced the preview of REST APIs for TFS. And they will allow me to read from TFS and write to TFS just the way the client object model did, although admittedly a lot less functionality is made available at the moment. But basically it'll give me access to most of this stuff using these REST APIs. So they're really new, they're still in preview. If you go to the documentation page, it will say version 1 of the REST APIs is in preview. What that really means is it might change. It probably won't, it's quite stable at the moment. It might change though. They let you access this with basic auth or OAuth, which gives you a lot of power in terms of how you talk to the thing and who you let access the application. So OAuth is that token-based thing where the guy who uses. So if you log into log into a site saying I want to log in using Twitter, that's how that works. That's OAuth. Passes you off to Twitter, and Twitter says, oh, this application wants to use your stuff. Is that cool? You say yes. It'll give that application a token, and then that application uses the token. So really secure web standard. I've created a short link just to the documentation there, VSO REST API, and it gives you all sorts of stuff like this. So a sample request, which is a get to this URL, and this is the kind of response you get back. So what's exposed at the moment is things like the users, projects and teams in TFS. A lot of stuff with source control, so Git and TFS, so all the pushes and all the change sets and things like that, all of that information. A lot of stuff to do with work items, and you've got reading and writing of work items there, so you can create new ones using these REST requests. Details about builds and tests, and stuff with team rooms as well. So you can just plug stuff into the team rooms. If something happens over here, you can send a request, you can send a post to the team room just to notify everybody that something's happened, for example. So here's our Bruce has come back to me now, and Bruce has said, look, I trust that what you've done is right, but I've kind of stopped looking. What I really want, when I come into the office each day, I just want a dashboard that just shows me the last check-ins, all the check-ins and the comments that people have made in the last 24 hours, like since yesterday. Just show me that. I can open that page, I can look, yeah, okay, great. Just for peace of mind, you know, it's not that I don't trust you, just, you know, I want to see it. So we go, okay, Bruce, no worries, we can do that. So let's close this one. We'll open up a new one and we'll say, we will just want this lightweight comment checker. Now we'll set that one as our startup. So what this does, this is using Nancy FX. Has anybody used Nancy FX? No? It's like an incredibly lightweight web platform. You can host it on ASP.NET, you can self-host, you can do stuff like that. But essentially you can write a web server and a Hello World web app inside a tweet. So inside 140 characters. It's pretty cool. Great for demos because I don't have to write a lot of code. So what I'm doing here is I've got a route here called just the default one, the root, and I'm just going to return this this page. On that page, which is in our views, I've just got a header and I've got an unordered list, so just a list of these check-ins that I'm going to fill up. And then I've got a little bit of jQuery. It just goes to get some data, and then it will parse that data and say, oh, this person checked in and this was their comment. So that's all it does. So this is what we call a REST request, basically, or this is making a REST request. It's just doing a get out to a particular URL, and it's pulling back information in JSON format. So that's all it's doing. It's just some AJAX. So that's calling this, where is it? Get change sets. So this is our other route, and our get change sets will hit this URL. So this is the name of this local machine. So it's hitting that /TFS/default collection APIs, Team Foundation version control, change sets from a particular date. So that's just yesterday. And then it'll grab that information. This is the get VSO request. It's just using an HTTP client, passing in credentials, and then just doing a get. So there's nothing fancy with this. This is just a web request. Just doing a HTTP get to a URL and getting the information back. So really simple stuff. But what we get when we run this is a self-hosted Nancy site, so it runs a little console thing for me. And we get this page. So I've made a couple of check-ins since then. So now there's 4. There's one which I just did then. I did my improved error handling. I got rid of that performance improvement in that little demo. And there was that one I just did then, increased responsiveness, performance improvement. So it's just got this information from TFS, just using a request. If we use Chrome just to see what happens, and remember I'm just passing what TFS gives me straight back again, you can see the results of that. This response is just passing this JSON string, just this count, value, change set ID, all that kind of stuff. Really basic stuff. Any questions about that and how that works? It's pretty straightforward, and there's a lot of these things. The Visual Studio documentation for this is really good. So it gives you an introduction to it, how to use it, how to authenticate, but also, you know, Git. How do I get all of the pushes? And so it'll give you an example, and it'll give you the response that's going to come back. Sorry. So what I used to do with these as well, by the way, this is a whole big chunk of JSON. So you'd have to go and you'd grab this object and you'd have it open over here, and you'd create a class that had a count and a value which had an array of these objects which had a push by property, and that push by would have to be another class which would have your ID and display name property. So you build up these C# representations of this object tree in JSON. Does anyone know a better way of doing that? No? This is, if you're doing this kind of stuff, this is the best tip you will ever get in your life. Trust me, this saves so much time. So we've got this deep object tree here. We don't want to write all these classes for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this. I'm just going to create a new file. Let's just create it in here. Actually, you know what? I don't even need to do that. I'm just going to do a class down here. Right. Edit. Paste special. Paste JSON as classes. And that's your object tree. So when you get these massive trees of data back from TFS with, you know, all of the details about the last 35 check-ins, including all the comments and who made them and all the work items that are connected and all that sort of stuff, this lets you do it really, really easily. Paste that into your own code. Super handy. Definitely use that.
That's standard functionality, or is that web extension?
Oh, that's a good question. It's one of those. It's either standard functionality or web extensions. Actually, you know what? It'd be standard, because I don't think I've put many tools on here. I think I've got ReSharper on there, and that's it. So I don't know whether... Let's see what I have installed. Oh, I have a lot. What is it? Extensions. There we go. So there's some of these. I don't have the web extensions though. But you should have web extensions on anyway if you're doing web stuff. Yep.
So Damian, I just got an email thank you from the chief architect at Team Companion. So that means people in Croatia are watching your video.
Oh, really? Fantastic. Hey. Awesome. Yeah. So there you go. That's a really cool tip. Remember that tip, even if you don't remember the REST stuff. Look the REST stuff up. You can't look this stuff up. This is gold I'm giving you. Anyway. Yeah, so REST stuff, really, really handy. Easy to do, and you can do it from anywhere. If you're writing an iPhone app, you can just make a HTTP request to your TFS server and get the last 10 check-ins. It's fantastic. So once again, we go back to the client. He's ecstatic. He says, look, it might have been nicer if you styled it a little bit better, but you know, he's generally happy. That's okay. So these REST APIs, the biggest thing here is this is the direction that things are moving in the future. So yes, you can do stuff with the client object model, but if you can do it with REST, do it with REST. I suspect even Microsoft, if they started doing your Team Explorer stuff from scratch today, they'd probably start to do it using these REST APIs instead of the client object model, as much as they could, and they'd just build up these REST requests. these REST APIs. But in other words, if you can do it this way, you should do it this way, because that's where Microsoft is putting their effort. OAuth 2 gives you awesome authentication way of doing it. It's a little bit tricky to do the first time, but if you go to the documentation, there's a chunk of code that you can use. They've made that really easy. So this area will grow. That list of things that you can do at the moment, that's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. The other thing is, I don't know whether anybody remembers, there was an OData API kind of quietly released a little while ago. Did anybody have a look at that? No, not very many people. Okay. It was a release while they were doing some work for the REST request. So you could make a request to TFS and give it and use the OData standard, which is arguments that talked about what fields you wanted, what sorting, what grouping, all that kind of stuff. The problem with it is, yes, it's really powerful, but you've got to do a lot of work in the back end to be able to deal with any request that somebody makes. And remember, this TFS has been around for a while. To make that available to everybody was going to be a lot of work. It's also not really, it's not really that RESTful. I mean, you're calling a URL and you're getting a response back. Yes, that's fine. But you can change that URL in a number of different ways and it changes things. The more RESTful kind of way of doing it is hitting a URL and passing in an object which represents what you want. The way they're doing these REST APIs is a bit more in line with where the industry is going for the web. So it's a bit safer to use than these OData APIs. Yeah, hot tip, paste as JSON. It saves a lot of time. So the good things are really highly accessible. If you're writing an iPhone app, call it. If you're doing something for Android, call that. If you want a Outlook plugin that runs on a tablet and does all sorts of weird stuff, yeah, it's just an HTTP request. You can do it from anywhere. It's where Microsoft is investing their stuff, so it's definitely going to improve in the future. And it's modern tech, it's web, whatever we're up to now, 2.7 or something. It's still in preview though, and what that's generally meant is not that it's unstable and will sometimes work and sometimes won't. Sometimes the documentation is a little bit flaky. So as an example, there's a couple of calls where it says that the project name that you pass in is optional, and it's actually not at the moment. So you may try something straight from their documentation, it might not work. Now all of that's going to be cleaned up. They're going to fix all of that sort of stuff, but because it's in preview, you've got to take this documentation a little bit with a grain of salt and do a bit of exploration of your own. You can't quite do it on premises. It's released for Visual Studio Online, but as you saw, I just did it against the local TFS instance. So some of these methods are going to work, some of them won't. Some of the ones that work will give you different information than what Visual Studio Online might give you. So my advice is to wait until they officially announce it for the on-premises version and then use it. In the meantime, go nuts on the Visual Studio Online stuff. That stuff's great. Any questions on that REST API stuff? No. It's definitely worth exploring, guys. Absolutely have a look at it if you want to talk to TFS. Our timesheet application, for example, that we use internally, TimePro for SSW, which you can start using it now, by the way, so sswtimepro.com, I think. It uses the client object model to talk to TFS at the moment, but we're in the process of making a change so it uses the REST API, because that's a better way of doing it. It's a web application anyway. You may as well just use that stuff. So it's the way forward. Yeah. Is there a question?
Could you just go over again the authentication for that request? So I saw you passing default authentication.
Yeah. So with this authentication, what I did here. Yeah, sorry. So the question was about authentication for doing this. So I kind of brushed over that a little bit, and the reason is, well, the main reason is I kind of took a little bit of a shortcut with this demo. So with Visual Studio Online, there's two ways to authenticate. You can authenticate using your basic credentials, or you can authenticate using OAuth. Now, because I'm talking to a local TFS server, I didn't do either of those. They haven't announced exactly how they're doing this authentication, but you can use Windows authentication. So because I'm running this as a particular user, it's just going to pass those credentials through if I do this. If you're doing it for the web, and our next demo will, it's going to look at one at Visual Studio Online. You can give basic credentials, or you can set up an OAuth token and do it all like that. The basic credentials, if you go into Visual Studio Online and have a look at your user profile, so if I look at my profile, I've tested this, it's not going to give you my password, which is good. There's a credentials tab in there, and you can set up alternate authentication credentials. And so you can use basic authentication to pass in my secondary username and my password. And what that'll do is it'll just put an authentication header in your request, and this is stuff that's pretty much out of the box in for the HTTP clients and stuff that you'd use in your code. Just pass in that basic authentication stuff and it'll authenticate as this user. The other thing you can do is the OAuth tokens. Now, because they haven't officially released it for TFS on premises, they haven't really said exactly how the authentication is going to work with that. There may be another way to do it. You may be able to use OAuth, and just a little hint, if you were paying attention when we looked at the plugins, you'll see that there's this .NET OpenAuth.dll. So, you know, this is the on-premises one. It's the same code base though, so maybe it's just, maybe they just left it there. But, you know, you can read into that what you want. So you may be able to use OAuth that way. You can definitely use Windows authentication and just pass those credentials through. But there may be other ways of doing it. There may be trusted certificates. There might be all sorts of other stuff. I just don't have any information on that. So, does that explain?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's quite clear.
So in the next demo, we're going to do some more of this REST stuff, and we're going to take one step further and do a little bit more cool stuff. But that's going to use Visual Studio Online, so it's just going to use basic authentication. So I'll show you how that fits as well. All right. So service hooks, this is the next really cool thing as well. This lets us be notified when stuff happens with Visual Studio using standard web stuff. So the way it kind of works is that when something happens in TFS or Visual Studio Online, it'll send a request, an HTTP request to something. Now what Microsoft has done is they've implemented all of these webhooks already, or service hooks, with various things. So you've got your Azure Service Bus, your Azure Storage, Campfire, HipChat, MyGet, Trello, all sorts of these things. So you can automatically just go through the dialogues and wire these things up. David was talking earlier about the Service Bus being really useful now, and Azure's putting a lot of effort into that, making that really high performance. And yeah, all about the speed. So what you could do is on an event in TFS, any of these events, so a build completed event, you could send a message to a notification hub or a service bus queue or a topic or something like that, and then use whatever application you have listening on the other side to perform a task based on that. So that gives you a lot of power. All sorts of this other stuff, Zendesk, Zapier, webhooks, user voice even. So there's a lot of these which we'll talk about in a sec, but this is also still in preview. It basically came out alongside the REST APIs. So same kind of issues with this. It's not necessarily going to be the 100% version. However, it's quite stable. It's really, really stable. They've given you integration out of the box with a lot of services and apps. And the REST APIs actually let you set up subscriptions and query what subscriptions exist in TFS. So I can use the REST API from my application to register my application as a subscriber to a particular event, for example. So you can do this all in code without touching a UI. I've also set up a short link for this. So this is basically just a link to a blog post about service hooks, how to use them, things like that. So you get all of these items here. I just mentioned a few of them as well. The ones that I'm particularly interested in are Zapier, which is the one that Microsoft's been talking about, and also webhooks. So webhooks is the most powerful one because basically you're saying when something happens in TFS, hit this URL and send me the information. So if there is a webhook that exists already, yep, use that. But if there's no webhook and nothing to hook into your third-party application, but there is an API, then just use a webhook, hit a URL, maybe do some processing under the covers, and then pass it on. So that basically means you can do anything in response to any of these events.
Where does that come from? I've not heard of that.
The webhooks? The webhooks come from, so the question was, where do the webhooks come from? Webhooks is basically just a term that means, it's not a service? No, sorry, it's not a service. So that's kind of the outlier. The rest of these are services. This one is a hit a URL. So I'll show you that. We'll add this to that demo. So this is the part of the OMG WTF BBQ thing that I'm studying. So this demo is a little bit more interactive. So if you've got a phone with the internet, and of course you do, grab it out. We'll get to that in a sec. So what I've got here, I'll kill these ones. So what we've got here is a little bit of an example of what you can do with this. So what I want to do, so my client's come back to me as well. He loves this stuff, but now he wants his clients to be even more involved in this process, right? He wants his clients to be able to decide what work items you work on next, or what work items need your performance improvements. So we've written him a little app called the Work Item Voter app. And so this is how it works. We have 2 or more backlog items, product backlog items, sitting in our backlog. And then we just want to let our customers know, here are the things you want to vote on, right? Just choose between these 2. Put a vote out there. So we just give them this website, right? It just picks 2 items from the backlog and lets people vote on them. Pretty basic. But what we want to do is we want to use the REST APIs to pull this information out of TFS. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get 2 work items out of TFS using the REST APIs, and then we're going to subscribe to events and make things happen as we go through it. So that's our first bit, our REST APIs to pull that information out. When there's a couple of votes for these things, then we'll move it to approved. The community has approved these items. It's going to move from, here we go, from new to approved. That's great. The other thing we want to do is we want to set up one of these integration things. So just for the purposes of this, he wants to be really public about what you're working on at the moment. So we're going to put this Zapier thing to use. Has anybody used Zapier before? No, I actually hadn't heard about this at all until Microsoft mentioned it in their announcements about Visual Studio Online. Has anyone used a similar, there's a similar thing, has anybody used called if this then that? Nope. Yep, a couple people. So if this then that is basically exactly what it sounds like. If something happens, then do something else. So some examples are things like, we learn more. If, for example, if somebody posts a thing to Facebook tagging me, then also tweet that, send that to Twitter. I've even got one that says if the temperature goes above 30 degrees in Brisbane, then send me an SMS. So it uses these. I can, yeah. Can I not figure it out? Well, I'm inside, cutting code in the dark, like a good developer. Yeah, that's right. Dan's watch tells him that. Yeah, I know. All right. There's another one that I've got set up that I think if I send an email to a particular folder, or if I send an email to a particular email address that I own, then also get any attachments from that email and put them in a folder in Dropbox. So I can do really cool stuff like that. Now, that's great, but you have to come in and set these things up in general. There might be an API for this, but I don't know it. Zapier is like that, but for APIs, for services. And that's one of the big things that Microsoft has partnered with these service hooks. So I can create a new Zap here. And what I want to do is in response to see how many of these things there are? There's all these things that you can pull out. But let's go all the way down to Visual Studio Online. So when, I'm bad at the alphabet, by the way. Visual Studio Online, when a work item is updated. So I want to be notified when one of these things gets approved, right? So when somebody updates a work item, and I can tune this a little bit later, then I want to tweet something. I could start typing, I'm sure. Where's Twitter? I'm blind. It's like when somebody's looking over your shoulder. You can never see the thing. Anyway, so I want to create a tweet. So when something gets checked in, when something moves state, I want to tweet that, hey, somebody voted for this thing. So I've already set up an account, but that's really just as simple as connecting to a new one and using OAuth actually to say, yeah, I give this application permission to use my account. So that's great. I've chosen that one, and I've also set up a Twitter account. Exactly the same thing. Just line up a Twitter account. And so I want to continue. So now we're talking to TFS, and they're using the same REST APIs that I am. So I want to look at this project called, very creatively, Integration Demo. So in that project, I don't care about the area path. Any area path is fine. Work item types, yeah, I care about that. That should be a product backlog item. And I can also say if the state has changed. So state, system.state. But I can go even further. I can add a custom filter and say, well, the state has to change to approved. So where are we? System state. Can anyone see it? I'm doing exactly the same thing as I did before. Ah. Oh, God. So if you press backspace on that, it loses focus. And let's do that again. Integration demo, great, it's kept all my stuff. So custom filter. I'm just going to drop down and find it because I'm scared now.
If that site's keeping some of your credentials that it needs to do to run this, do you have any feeling security that
So the question was, is this, if they're keeping the credentials for this, do I have any concerns? And the answer is no, they're not keeping my credentials. So this is to do with the way that OAuth works. So when I say to Zapier, I want you to connect to Team Foundation Server, Team Foundation Server uses OAuth 2 to authenticate this application against that. So what it actually does under the covers is it will open a new window, which is a Visual Studio Online window, so not Zapier at all. It'll open a window and say, hey, log in to Visual Studio Online if you haven't already. And Zapier has asked whether it can use your account. And I'll say, yes, it can. Visual Studio Online will then create a token, so just a GUID, just a string, and pass that back to Zapier and say, here's your token if you want to do stuff on behalf of this person. If at any point I want to revoke that, that token's just going to stop working. So they never have my password, they never have my, they might have my username, I don't know. When you do one of these OAuth things, it'll tell you what it's requesting access to do as well. So no, I'm not terribly concerned. So what I want to do is I want to say that the state actually exactly matches approved. Why? Right. So that's what I want to have. I want to have when system state exactly matches approved, then I'll do it. Right? So there we go. The contents of my tweet. I want to say and I've got these fields that I can insert as well. It's really cool. What else should I put? SSW TV, Adam? So what this is going to say, if you vote in one of these things, it's going to say whatever the name of this product backlog item is, work item was voted in. Great, fantastic. So let's create that thing. I can test it, and it'll give me sample data. And the reason it does this is just to make sure that it's talking the same language as TFS. So it's saying go and create a brand new item and then come back, just so it can test these things. So let's create a new one, just so Zapier can see what comes back from TFS. Great, that's created. Okay, I did it. Just having a look. I've actually had a little bit of problems with this. So sometimes it takes a little while and you have to kill this thing and it says, oh, actually I know about stuff anyway. So I'm just going to kill that. And Zapier is being a little bit slow talking. So while it's doing that, I'm just going to go and create the other one I want to show you. So if you go to the admin for a particular site, this is in Visual Studio Online, you'll see this new service hooks tab. So I could have done it from this side as well. I don't have as much control though, which is why I was doing it through Zapier. So I can see, actually there's a Zapier one here already. So it knows that when a work item is updated, it needs to send the product backlog item and the state field. It needs to send a notification to Zapier, and Zapier will know what to do with that. But I want to add another one, right? And this is the one I want to add. So I'm going to just kill this webhook, because I've already done this, and I want to add a new one. So this is really just to give you an idea of what happens with the webhooks. So I want to create a new webhook, and I want to say when a work item is updated, same kind of thing. So when the state field changes, I have a little bit less control over this, at least here. When that state field changes, I want to hit a particular URL. So I wrote this little tool to help me with this stuff to see what these things are, called REST request test.azurewebsites.net. And then, so the way this works is you just give it a key, something at the end. So SID net, where are we? Net UG. There we go. And I need to give it a thing. There we go. So what this little tool does is it just captures any request you send to this thing, and it'll store it under that key, and then it'll show you all the requests that have gone to that URL. So pretty basic. I don't need any authentication for this thing, but if I did, I could use basic authentication. And I want to send all of the details. I want to send all of the messages. You can send them in different formats. JSON is your standard one. And I want to send all the detail. So that's good as well. So I'm going to finish that. So what's going to happen when Zapier gets his act together? What's going to happen is that I'll expose this guy. This might not end up working, Zapier. I'm going to expose this website. People are going to vote on these things, and when they hit a couple of votes, it's going to say, right, this one's been approved, and there's going to be two things that happen, hopefully, if Zapier behaves itself. One is going to be that it's going to tweet from my account to say, hey, this one got voted in. And the other thing that's going to happen is it's going to also put the information that it sends at a URL so I can show you all what it looks like. Cool? Now comes the fun part. I'm just going to pretend that Zapier is going to work. How about that? So if you've got a phone and you have the internet, this is pretty unusual for a talk, but open it up and go to demo-tfs.cloudapp.net. So yeah, everyone should do it. And at the same time, I'm actually going to do it on my phone. And I'm going to show you.
Do you want us to vote seriously?
Yeah, so I've got two items in there. Actually, before you do that, just let me just... Oh, that's right. Oh, sorry.
demo-tfs.cloudapp.net.
Demo-tfs.
You won't let me vote again.
No, it won't. You only get one vote, Adam.
I was trying to rig it. I could vote twice.
Could you?
Spin up a virtual machine. Use a different browser.
So there we go. That's your URL.
Use a different browser.
So for the... Has everybody got that URL? Everybody okay? Question?
I tried to do it in incognito after I voted, and it still knew I voted. How's that?
Oh, it's because you've got web developers working on this stuff. I don't know. It only lets you vote once. It's not very hard to get around, but I'd really prefer it if you didn't.
How does incognito not get around it?
Did you refresh again?
Yeah, of course. But
Oh, is it giving you a message saying that
there's not enough work items?
there you go. So that means that somebody's got a message out there saying, hey, this has already been voted in, or it's changed since your thing. So I'm just going to, for the benefit of the guys on the webcast, I'm just going to show, if you guys didn't get a chance to do it, here we go. How's this for technology? There you go. So that's what it looks like on my phone, at least.
Responsive.
Yeah, responsive. That's Bootstrap for you. And where are we? This is all reversed. This is really... And I'll vote for something. And it says the work item's been approved since I loaded that page. So, you know, there's a little bit in this update method, which I'll show you. So the update request, REST request that you can send to TFS. Oh, that's too much of me. The update request that you can send, you have to send it a version as well to make sure that you're not overriding. So it's this pessimistic locking kind of stuff that they're doing as well. But it just makes it a bit safer. So in other words, if that work item had changed since I loaded that page, it's not going to work. So all right, let's go back and see what happened as a result. Has anybody got my Twitter open? Because I don't know whether that tweeted. Let's open it up in front of everybody. Can you just go to slash my thing? Who uses Twitter? I use Twitter. Look. Yeah, yep. There you go. Zapier just decided it wasn't going to... Oh, there we go. And it found it. Excellent. Oh, all right. It found it after the demo. So let's do... Let's forget about this. You know what? If you've still got that page open, I'll get you to refresh it in a second. And what I'll do is I'll go to the board and show you. Just haven't been touching this. You can see it. So, oh, both of them are over. You voted for both of them. Let's just move them back. So if you go back to that page, you should be able to vote again, just in case you really needed to. And let's just see if Zapier has worked, this online VSO. Anyone voting again? I'm going to vote again over here. Well, by again, I mean for the first time, because I was too slow. That was quick. Just one vote. Yep, it's a low bar. I set a very low bar. I think it needs 2 votes before it goes through, just to make sure that it actually happens. So, have we tweeted? Oh, look at that! The Builder TFS UI for Android work item was voted in. Tweeted from my Twitter account. Just then. That's cool. That's the first time that's worked in front of everybody. So how cool is that? That's basically TFS, in response to something that's happened, sending a message to Zapier, and Zapier can plug that into like 100 different applications to do this other stuff. The other thing, which I didn't do, so this REST request test.azure websites, if I go to that URL /view, by the way, feel free to use this little tool if you want to test this stuff out. I'll wipe it every now and then, but it's available. It doesn't take much. So we can see there was a request for this the sid.net UG. I'll just zoom this in a bit. The header has this information in it. So it came from, the original URL was this /sidnet UG, which is where it came from. It came from this IP address and this port, which is a little bit weird. Maybe they don't want you to know that. Went to this URL, it was JSON, all that kind of stuff. But here's the contents. So it's given us a subscription ID, notification ID, all this kind of stuff, a message, the product backlog item updated by whatever, so you can print that out, detailed messages with HTML, and even like the ID of the work item that got changed, the fields that got changed, what they got changed to, from and to. So this is the same stuff you get in the history in this case. So this has changed from, was the authorized date, the revised date, the system state changed from new to approved, all this kind of stuff. So it gives you huge amounts of information that you can do a lot of stuff with. And these service hooks, the stuff that it actually exposes to you, if you have a look, it'll tell you when a build completed, when a team room message has been posted, when stuff's checked in, when work items are being created, commented on, updated. So in other words, basically anything that happens in TFS that matches any of these events, you can be notified just at a web location. So it just hits a URL saying, oh, here's some information for you. So you can see how this can integrate with a ton of other stuff. You could put this into place at your organization. You just need an externally facing URL. So I reckon that's pretty cool. This wiring up everything from grabbing the information from TFS using the REST requests, pushing the information to updates and work items, and then subscribing to the events when work items have loaded as well. It's all in one thing using these new tools. So who wants to see a little bit of this code? There's not a lot in here, to be honest, to do all this sort of stuff. So we've got this VSO helper. So the first thing we do is run a query to get all work items that are product backlog items that are new. And this is WIQL. Who's familiar with WIQL or WIQL? It's like SQL, but it's the way you query TFS. This is just a string. I'm going to hit the work item template query results thing. I'm going to tell it what project it is, and I'm going to give it this query. And that's an object. And this will do a post. So this is really similar to the last example I gave you. So where are we? Post VSO query. Once again, we're using an HTTP client. We're saying this is JSON that we're sending. And we're adding this basic authentication, giving a username and password. So that's what you were asking about before. So this is how I'm authenticating. I could also pass a OAuth token and set all that kind of stuff up, but that's a little bit much for a demo. So I've done that, and I'm just doing a post to this visualstudio.com/apis/wit/query results. And then I'm passing in this query. When I get it back, I get this query result object. So you know how I was doing that post to JSON before? This is the C# version of whatever data is going to come back. Now, I don't care about most of it, so mine's really small. The good thing about this HTTP client stuff is if your object doesn't have a property that matches something that's in the JSON, it's just going to ignore it. So I only care about the as of field, which is the version, and the results, and things like the ID of the work item and the query and things like that. So that's all it's doing. It's just doing that post. So once I have those two work items, I need to get more detail. So I call the work items REST API, and I give it the list of IDs, and I say I want these fields. And then I'm just going to create this work items object with various values that come back. And I'm going to return that. So that gives us our first bit. That gives us our two items. The next thing is when somebody votes for one. So this is a little bit of a hacky way of doing it, but basically I'm constructing a JSON string to send to the server to say, here's the detail I want to update. And then I'm just going to send, and once again, this is a different HTTP verb called patch. So this is the way they expose these things. So there's a post if you want to send some information, there's patch if you want to update, and there's put or post if you want to create something. Actually, they use post rather than put. So all of this is in that documentation. So I'm going to do a patch. I'm going to set this work items thing, give it the ID, and then pass in this. I want to change this field and this field and this field. Once that happens, I just return that information and say, yeah, the vote has succeeded. So that's all of that stuff. Anything you want to drill in on there? Yep.
Patch used as a verb?
Yeah, so patch is an HTTP verb. So unfortunately, out of the box, the HTTP client that .NET exposes, so System Web HTTP Client, I think, or System.NET, one of those, it doesn't actually support the patch HTTP method. The list it gives you is the four, like get, post, put, and delete. So to do patch, you just need to create your own HTTP request message, give it a new HTTP HTTP method called patch, and that's all you need to do. It's still like there's an extra 15 characters of code. It's not a big deal. But yes, that's just an HTTP verb. So essentially all I'm sending is a little bit of JSON, sending it to a particular URL using a verb. So it's truly RESTful. It's really, really good. So we'll make all of this code available as well. So I'm gonna strip out my credentials, which is probably a sensible thing to do. And I'll put this stuff on GitHub, make it public so you guys can see it. There's also another little example here that I did, which I haven't shown you, called the ALM dashboard, and it just makes a few more HTTP requests or REST requests to get information about the last check-ins, the last build statuses, the Git repositories, the projects, just to give you a bit more depth as well when you're looking at it. Cool. So I really like the fact that you can do that in so few lines of code. That entire demo probably took me 3 hours from scratch, just not knowing what the URLs were or anything. So right from looking at the documentation all the way to having a working application, which is pretty cool. Gives you a lot of power. So like I said, it was released alongside the REST APIs, so it's a little bit previewy. It's like if this then that for services. So in general, here's my advice. You use what Microsoft offers for integration. So if you're using HipChat or Trello or something like that, and that will meet your purpose, then use that first. If not, use a webhook and just write a really lightweight web application that just does the thing you want it to do. It's very likely, though, that there'll be many more of these services added in the future. Anybody? So I didn't ask this at the start. Who's using Visual Studio on? I basically want to see what versions of Visual Studio and TFS people are using. So whether you're using Visual Studio Online or TFS on premises 2013 or 2012 or below. So who's using Visual Studio Online? Yep, that's about half the room. That's really good. Anybody using TFS on premises? Yep, that's about half the room again. So obviously there's some overlap there. Anybody using 2012 on premises or below? Nobody. Anybody using 2010 or below? Sorry, the below part was the other one. So that's, I'm not good at category theory. So nobody's using anything lower than 2013. Wow, that's awesome. That's good. Sydney.NET User Group, that's the place to go if you're at the cutting edge. Oh well, don't even worry about this point then, you don't need to know. There's another hacky way you can do this if you're using older versions, and by older versions I mean anything from 2005 onwards. You know how you can set up alerts to send you an email when stuff happens? Turns out you can send a SOAP formatted message to a URL as well with that information. So if you're forced onto older versions of TFS, you can do that. But stop, because it hasn't changed since 2005. So go to the next version. That's for the guys watching at home as well. So this stuff, excellent for integration. This is where Microsoft's putting its investment as well. So you'll see huge leaps and bounds in this area. Again, modern technology, these webhooks, it's just information sent to a URL. It's the simplest thing you can do. And again, that makes it really accessible. So it doesn't matter where your service sits, if it's on a Linux server, if it's on an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi or something, you could even do something there. And it's good for VS Online, so it's been released for Visual Studio Online. So that gives you notification stuff there, whereas the server object model, which we talked about before, that would let you be notified about things, it doesn't work for Visual Studio Online. So it's still in preview. It's definitely not in on-premises. So unlike the REST stuff where you can kind of hit the URL and it might work, there's nothing to, you can't do anything here until they actually release it. It only gives you notifications. So where the server stuff, the server object model would let you make changes to what happens or reject things, this is only going to tell you that something happened. Of course, you could find out that a work item has moved to approved and go, no, I don't want that, and move it back using the REST requests. That's a possibility as well. So the documentation on this, a little bit average again. It's still in preview, so that stuff's going to clean up really quickly. And there are some integration limitations as well. So for example, Trello, you can create a card in Trello in response to some stuff. But that's all you can do. You can't update a card. So I could set up a webhook to do, or a service hook to say when somebody changes the state of a work item, then make a card in Trello. But that means if somebody moves it to approved, it'll create a card. If they move it back to new, it'll create a new card. So there's some kind of limitations in some of these things as well. In some cases, it's better to write your own webhook for the moment. All this is going to improve. Right, so there we go. So this is what we've looked at. We've looked at the process template customization first, which is plugging in your process into, plugging in the team project template into your process. The client object model for talking outside of TFS, server object model for doing stuff inside TFS, and then the REST APIs for talking to TFS over the web from anywhere, and the service hooks as well to be notified when stuff happens over the web to anywhere. So the combination of all this stuff, you can see exactly how extensible TFS is. So again, we looked at these different ways of integrating and the different ways you can do it. So I would recommend, as much as possible, lean towards the REST APIs and the service hooks, and try and avoid the process template customization unless there's a very good need for it, simply because of the upgrade path and the fact you can't do it in Visual Studio Online. And the same kind of thing with the client object model and the server object model. Yeah, they're really useful, but if you can do it with REST, then do that instead. Great. There's a lot of sources of information for this as well. So, oh look, there's a book apparently. There's a book that has a lot of this information that you should totally go and buy. And there's all these other ones. So there's an MSDN root of all of this extensibility stuff as well. So I've created just a little short link for that. So that's basically your starting point for anything. The object models, again, that starting point for the server object model, client object model, and also the build object model. If you, if you're not happy with life and you want to be a bit depressed, then go and have a look at the build object model. The REST API stuff, there's a short link for that. Service hooks, again, how to use them and what they do and so on. There's some stuff on the blog that TJ mentioned before. And of course, as always, the SSW rules to better TFS. So this contains a number of things, everything from upgrading from 2010 to 2012 to 2013, to how you should be doing things, which process templates you should be using, how to get better performance out of your developers using the Scrum template, and all sorts of awesome stuff like that. Excellent. Thank you.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.